All right, we are going live. And hey there, students, we are live for some AP Euro review. All right, so we've got Matthias over there, the brain cow. All right, so excellent, excellent review time. That's right, Starry. Now, those of you on the Crowdcast, remember you can go to the Q&A is over there. You can go to the Q&A and you can ask your questions. Okay, everything's good for there. You can go to the Q&A, ask a question, and I'll have some things I can talk about, of course, as well. But let's go ahead and make sure that we're going after what y'all want to do there. And Crayon Alert, hello on YouTube. Every once in a while, I'm going to be on the YouTube chat. I'm going to go check that out, but mostly I'm going to be interacting with the Crowdcast participants. So if you're on YouTube, go ahead and click that if you want to be a little bit more interactive. And Lily, you're excited. I'm also excited. Now, remember, I'm frequently shouting out to new Instagram followers. That's something that, as far as the I'm going to be shouting out to y'all. Now, I also may promote some of the TikTok followers. Okay, so I do have my latest rap is doing okay on TikTok right now. So if I see CJ, the streams love you too. Okay, so as far as that goes, I've got a few new TikTok followers: Morgan and Sergita and Katsu Queen, Valeria. Eleanor, it looks like, as far as that goes. So we've got a few folks following on TikTok. So again, once in a while I'm going to go to Instagram, once in a while to TikTok, at Tom Richey on both platforms. See if y'all what y'all think about the new little rap bit. And also, I can rap tonight unless y'all just don't want to hear it, right? So as far as that goes, thank you so much, Laura, on YouTube for the kind words. So we're going to go ahead and go to the Q&A on Crowdcast and think about in terms of, we've got a question from Alex. Now, those of you that are new to Crowdcast, remember that you can not only ask questions in the Q&A, but you can upvote questions in the Q&A. So we're going to go ahead and start with a question from Alex. Which scientist during this time will be the most important? So going from there, let's see. So let's see, AP Euro course and exam. We're going to run in there real quick. And I would say that, Galileo, I think Galileo and Copernicus, those are pretty important. What I can see here when I go through like what's really required there: Copernicus, Galileo, Newton, and William Harvey. Okay, William Harvey. These are some people. Now, Francis Bacon, Rene Descartes. So these are some things, as far as that goes, I would say those are kind of your fave five of the scientific revolution. And let me go over there, and I'm going to go to my slides, and we're going to bring a few things up here, because one of the biggest shifts that we see here is when we start to think about, okay, the ancient authorities. Okay, this is really where everything starts. The scientific revolution and Enlightenment, if we're in the Renaissance and Reformation period, Europeans are still in this mode where they explain things mostly with the Bible, or they explain things using old superstitions. And this is going to start to move to where we start thinking about, if there's an earthquake, it's probably not because God was mad at the people in the place where the earthquake was. Okay, that it's probably because of natural occurrences. And but before that, it's like, if there's an earthquake, well, God, what did we do wrong? So scientific thinking that is based on empiricism and rationalism becomes very important. And thank y'all so much, Knox Canyon, Emily Jordan B _, let's see, Crayonator, Riley, and Juliana and James. Thank y'all so much for the recent Instagram follows. So we want to think about how were people thinking before the scientific revolution, including during the Renaissance, because the early scientific revolution is during the Renaissance. And this is basically, if you want to take like a screenshot of this or something like that, go right ahead. So Copernicus and Galileo. Okay, so as far as that goes, we are going from geocentrism to heliocentrism. Now, remember that. Now, one thing I remember, I think I may have learned in elementary school, that, people thought the world was flat, and Columbus is like, the world's not flat. The world's not flat. And, but that's not the way it was. But people really did think that the earth was the center of the universe. Geocentrism is this idea that the earth is just here and the sun is going around the earth and all the planets. And it kind of goes along with, it's not just because it's in the Bible. Let's think about Renaissance humanism, for example. If we think about like Michelangelo's the creation of Adam. Okay, if we think about the creation of Adam and we look here, that basically this idea of God thoughtfully creating Adam. Some people speculate that Michelangelo is actually, painting the human brain here behind God, that God is basically the genius behind the human brain. And God really loves us and wants to touch us, and we're the ones who were too lazy to touch him back. And so as far as that goes, when you look at, the creation of Adam, of course, that's in the Sistine Chapel. Now, the Sistine Chapel is where starting on, I think, Tuesday, we're going to see the papal conclave, where, well, we're not going to see it because they're going to be, they're going to be cloistered or whatever, but there's going to be the black smoke, the white smoke, and they're going to be able to look up. If one of the cardinals gets bored next week, they're going to look up. They're going to see like Michelangelo's paintings, okay? But one thing we want to note is that Renaissance humanism, when Pico della Mirandola delivers the Oration on the Dignity of Man, he's also talking about how God has placed us at the center. And so it's not just that Galileo, when he, says that, hey, I think Copernicus was right about heliocentrism, that it's not just that he is, speaking against the Bible, but he's speaking against the currents of Renaissance humanism. And when we think about the Renaissance, who is smarter than the Greeks and the Romans? Okay, so if we think about Aristotle, Ptolemy, or Ptolemy, it's a written test, so it doesn't really matter how you say it, and Galen. So Aristotle, which today, I still talk about Aristotle today when I'm talking about rhetoric and, aesthetics and politics and other things like that. But Aristotle during the Renaissance was still considered the greatest authority on physics, astronomy, and logic. When Aristotle said that the moon is the moon is made of ether, like of some type of spiritual matter or something like that. You know what? That's okay because Aristotle says it, right? And so, this sort of thing, Aristotle was the most important, was the most important philosopher. And so Galileo starts disproving Aristotle's things about physics and astronomy. And another thing that we want to note here is when we're thinking about empiricism and rationalism. Now, here's something I've got on a YouTube lecture. If you want to see my lecture on Copernicus and Galileo, it's on YouTube, okay? But when we start thinking about this term empiricism, okay, empiricism means that we can observe it. We can relate to it with our senses. So Galileo makes this telescope, makes a better telescope than anybody had ever made, and you can see it. So, okay, well, Aristotle says that the moon is made of some kind of spiritual substance. Well, Aristotle says it. The Greeks and the Romans were so smart. Galileo says, but I've got a telescope. I'm able to prove, right? So, the biggest thing about the scientific revolution is thinking in terms of empiricism, being able to prove something scientifically. Now, also, if we consider, Descartes, who was a rationalist, okay? Inductive and deductive reasoning is there as well. But yeah, so Descartes, the two things when you think about scientific thinking, okay, empiricism and rationalism. So empiricism says that I can see it with, I can see it, touch it, smell it, taste it. I've been able to prove with sensory experience. And then rationalism is saying that, okay, I can go through this logically. And when we think about scientific thinking, those twin pillars of empiricism and rationalism. And so, so Galileo is a great example. Galileo's telescope is a great example of empiricism. And so when we're thinking about that Galileo, when Aristotle says that, like, heavier objects fall faster than lighter objects. Well, it sounds good, but Galileo goes to the top of the Leaning Tower of Pisa and he drops a bowling ball or not a bowling ball, but like a cannonball, right? Kind of like a bowling ball, except no finger holes, but a bowling ball and a musket ball. They're the same shape and they are made of the same thing. He drops them both from the top of the Leaning Tower of Pisa and, they land at the same time. So who cares what Aristotle says? We've proven him wrong. Now, of course, that really just makes people shudder because it's like, Aristotle was Greek, and who are we to say we're smarter than he is? Well, that's one thing about that kind of separates the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment from the Renaissance. The Renaissance is a very backward looking movement, and the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment are much more forward looking. And so when we think about Copernicus and Galileo, they are challenging not just biblical cosmology, but also Ptolemy, or I just like to say Ptolemy. Ptolemy's just, it's fun to say. It's fun to say. And you know what? Just like it's fun to, look at the TikToks and see if anybody new's following me. So we've got Shay, Abs, Aaron, Abby, and Kiral and Morgan. Thank you all so much. So then medicine. Now, the humoral theory of disease. Like you'd go to the doctor back then, the doctor would be like, your humors are messed up, okay? Your humors. I mean, and if a doctor tells you that today, just go. Just get out of there. And, Galen's anatomy was not based on human dissection because the Greeks, the Romans, the Christians, they did not they thought, you can't dissect humans because, you kind of need that for the afterlife. Well, Vesalius, made a whole anatomy book. I tell you what, this guy, I mean, he was an anatomist. Now, also, William Harvey shows up in the course and exam description. And William Harvey was an English physician. Now, the old way of doing things that said, hey, you're sick, well, I guess your humors are messed up. Well, William Harvey kind of figures out, well, you know what? One of the biggest reasons people get sick is because their blood is not circulating properly. And let's think about this. Heart disease is the biggest cause of death in the United States today. Your heart is not circulating the blood the right way. Heart attacks, high blood pressure, all of these things have to do with the circulation of the blood. And so William Harvey, says like, look, this humoral theory of disease, not so much, okay? What is really important for good health is that the blood is circulating properly. So that's somebody that it is very important to know who William Harvey is, okay? So that's going to be important as well. And so with that, I need to be able to sense things, empiricism, and I need to be able to make sense of things, rationalism. So as far as the scientific revolution, that's all going to be important. Now, also with the Enlightenment, we would think of like Voltaire and Rousseau. Of course, Locke and Newton kind of build a bridge between the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. So these things are all, are all important. So we're going to, and we think about women. The person that I like to talk about a lot is Emily du Châtelet, who was Voltaire's, one-time mistress, later friend, that kind of stuff. And she was basically in a position where Voltaire was a man of letters, which I'm in the humanities. Okay, I study history. I deal with writing, with words, and that kind of thing. I'm not that great at math. Okay, so the thing is, Voltaire was not a mathematician or a scientist, and so he really relied on Emily du Châtelet. Voltaire liked Newton, he liked the idea of Newton, but he didn't really understand Newton. And so, Emily du Châtelet had to explain this, had to explain Newton to Voltaire in a way that he could understand it and explain Newton to regular people. So going from here, let's see here. What is, so we've got here, all right, we got Nicholas Curtis. Awesome. Well, thank you, Nicholas. I'm glad I could help. So as far as that goes, Taylor Smith, well, I tell you what, we don't know exactly, sometimes we don't know exactly what there. And so thank y'all so much. We got some messages retracted there. Now, remember, if you're watching on YouTube, glad to have you here. Feel free to join us on Crowdcast, and let me see what's going on in the chat. Let's go ahead and take a little look at the chat here. And whoo, all right. So we got there. Might be better in the Q&A. That's right. So remember, as far as that goes, that the Q&A is the chat. Every once in a while I'll say something, hey Lauren, hey CJ, hey Matthias, but at the same time, like the Q&A is where I'm really going to be looking here. And so one of the things that we want to make sure that we understand, very well here. Now, thank you, Matthew Henry Baker. We've got Jacqueline Hen and Ahan Patel 85. Thank y'all so much for your recent follows on Instagram. And so the scientific revolution, society, government, and culture. One of the things that we want to understand about the scientific revolution is these guys were not exactly trying to change society. Like, a lot of these guys in the scientific revolution, this was more science for the sake of science. I love talking about Francis Bacon and how he died. He was doing some kind of experiment to see if you could use snow to preserve like chicken. Okay. Like he had these dead chickens and he's like, well, can I use snow to preserve like the chicken's meat to eat later? This guy's kind of like got this idea of what we call today the freezer, right? And he's like, how can I do this? Can it preserve the meat? And then he gets like pneumonia. Like he's going out and he's like stuffing like snow into these chicken carcasses. And then he gets sick and dies. Okay. Now, what I'm saying about this is a lot of folks in the scientific revolution, they weren't necessarily trying very hard to reform society. Okay. What they're really trying to do more than anything is just advance science. Now, when we get to the Enlightenment, that is when we start to see, when we get to the Enlightenment, that people want to take scientific, ideas and principles and think, wouldn't it be nice if we started arranging things this way? So when we're considering the values of the Enlightenment, what we would consider core Enlightenment values, let's go ahead and just go over that for just a second. So when we think about this, the Enlightenment values reason, science, progress, liberty, and toleration. Okay, so, and one thing that we could note here is it's a more worldly approach to thinking, like thinking about things with a reference to this world and a lot less about what's going on out there. Remember, Enlightenment deism says that God created the earth, that he set up natural laws, and then he's kind of left us to ourselves here, okay? That he got everything all set up, and then the rest is on us. And so reason, okay? If we're thinking about, reason, that now this is another thing to note here. Reason, science, progress, liberty, toleration. Now, when we think about things that are values of the unenlightened, emotion, folk wisdom, stability, regulation, intolerance. This is like when you would think conventional and abstract thinking. So this is going to be something important as well. So when we're thinking about, reason versus emotion, how often do people say, like, I tell you what, like when they're describing their mistakes, they're like, gosh, I wish I would have thought less about that. Usually you're thinking like, hey, how often are people like sorry because I was just too reasonable and I'm sorry about that. Our emotions, like Enlightenment philosophers, they say that emotions don't lead to knowledge. Now, of course, they would be distinguished from the Romantics from there, because Romanticism is largely a reaction against the Enlightenment's excesses, where the Enlightenment goes all the way on the reason side. Romantics say, having emotions is a big part of being human. Having emotions is a big part of being human, and it's a part of who we are. Now, science, okay, the idea, and again, scientific thinking is based on empiricism and rationalism. And if there's something that I have reasoned out and or observed, then that's more important than tradition or folk wisdom or whatever else I've been told. Now, making progress. Now, romantics, that's another thing when we're thinking about the Enlightenment and romanticism as a counterpoint to the Enlightenment is that the Enlightenment is about progress. And basically, if there's a new technology, let's go for it. Okay. But, we can see, I know in my state of South Carolina, the legislatures passed a law saying that students can't use phones during the school day. This is one of those things where if you look at it from the point of view of the Enlightenment, if we've got a new technology, what could be wrong with it? Okay. So, but then we've learned that, hey, I mean, a lot of these new technologies we have, like having a little bitty mini computer that's more powerful than supercomputers were decades ago, and just having it all the time, it's in some ways kind of counterproductive. But the Enlightenment, if there's a new technology, we can uncritically accept it. And in fact, the human race is on, an unlimited march toward perfectibility. So progress, it gets in the way of stability. Okay, that's one thing. I tell you what, and I might step on some toes here, but fine, right? Because when it comes down to it, like when I use AI generated thumbnails, people are saying, hey, that's you're infringing on somebody's right or something like that. And it's like, well, wait, somebody somebody has if somebody's an animator, they've got the copyright on characters, right? But not necessarily on the style. Like styles of art and music are often imitated. Imagine if Leonardo da Vinci had said, hey, you can't copy my style, that kind of thing. But the thing is that AI being able to do art, it is going to change the way we think about art, that being an artist is going to begin to have more to do with how you can prompt, what you can imagine, and how you can articulate your imagination. But again, now there are always going to be artists, like people who are really talented. They're never going to have they're never going to lack for anything. But one thing to note is when people are saying AI, AI is bad, AI is da 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 da. Well, the thing is, the Enlightenment is like, hey, it's a new technology. We need to learn how to use it and think about how we can progress rather than, how we can just keep the world as it is. The reason why we're scared of AI is because, we're scared of the way that it might change the world. And so with that, it's important to kind of think about that. Now, of course, I mean, the AI could kill me next week or something like that. I don't know. But, that's something that we've got, again, the Enlightenment versus the Romantics. Now, when it comes to, the economy, not just the economy, but just in general, like when we think about classical liberalism, we're going to be talking about the isms, I think a couple nights from now or something like that, that we're going to be going into the isms. And when we get into the isms, it's going to be, something to where we're going to be considering like, classical liberalism, which is, all about, how are we doing, how are we doing liberty and that sort of thing, that people should be free to worship, people should be free to speak. This is something where, for example, opinions are not dangerous. The idea that opinions in and of themselves are not dangerous. When an opinion becomes dangerous is only when authorities start to regulate expressions of opinion. So that's when it starts to get problematic, is when people say these are the opinions that can be expressed and these are the opinions that cannot be expressed. Okay, that's when it starts to be problematic, is we see when that happens. And so going from there, I forget a little bit what is let's see, we've got coming up, let me just note, tonight we're doing science and the Enlightenment. Yeah, so we're going to do the French Revolution tomorrow, and I think Friday we're doing the Renaissance. So yeah, we've got a lot of cool stuff, and then the industry and isms. So again, we think about liberty versus regulation. Okay, so when it comes to governments regulating religion, regulating speech, regulating the economy. We'll want to remember when we get to the isms that the classical liberals are basically the banner carriers of the Enlightenment. So we want to be able to go from, basically go from the scientific revolution, science for the sake of science, to the Enlightenment. How can we apply these principles to society and also government? Let's think about Montesquieu. Okay. When you think about Montesquieu and scientific thinking about government, legislative, executive, judicial, we should organize government based on human experience and logic. So then, speaking of, as we said, opinions aren't dangerous. Whenever people start talking about, things like, hate speech being a dangerous thing, that there should be laws against it. Now, a lot of countries, a lot of European countries today have laws against hate speech. The United States doesn't have that because our Constitution has the First Amendment. Oh, the Constitution, ladies and gentlemen, just reminding y'all that I wrote a nice little book on the Constitution. You can find it on Amazon for about $15. U.S. Constitution 101 by Tom Richey with Peter Piccone. All right, so that's just a little in-house ad. I'd love for y'all to get a hold of my book. I think if you're going on to APUS history and APUS government, the book could have a lot in there that would be helpful to you. So toleration, that the idea that somebody having a different religion than you or a different belief system or different ideas, like, that basically anti-censorship, okay, and anti-intolerance, that, whether it's religious intolerance, political intolerance, ethnic or racial intolerance, that, it's just other people are not a threat to you and their beliefs are not a threat. And so this is really kind of the idea. If we want to construct a society on the model of the Enlightenment, that's how it would look like. Okay, so let me go ahead and let's check the chat here. All right, wow, we got a lot of new messages here. All right. So with that, you have to take APUSH next year, Lauren. I will be here to help you. I teach APUSH and AP Euro. And Mary at YouTube. As far as that goes, I try to stay away from DBQ predictions. I always tell people that the DBQ is a process. Okay, the DBQ is a process. And so thank you very much, Tiffy, for the kind words. But the DBQ is a process. Your mindset should really be, instead of trying to predict the DBQ, you need to be thinking about, how can I do well on the DBQ no matter what it's about? And thank you, Sam Hearn 098, for the Instagram follow. Let me check TikTok and see if we've got anybody, any new followers on the TikToks. All right, so as far as that goes, is that what we got here? Let's see here. We got Sierra and D18388 on the TikToks. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, we're going on to the next question. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the next question. All right, so the most important Enlightenment philosophers, okay? So I would say that unequivocally, the most important Enlightenment philosopher would be Voltaire, okay? And as far as Voltaire, Candide, if you've never read Candide, you should definitely do that. It's one of my favorite books. And basically, it's just this little philosophical, tragicomic tale that is just sometimes so sad that it's funny. Like one of those things, like, kind of like when somebody slips and falls on the floor or something like that. And you're just like, you're laughing, even though they might be hurt, but it's like, oh, that's kind of like Candide, that sort of thing. So with that, Voltaire is a big, advocate of religious toleration. Thank you, Matthew, for the TikTok follow. Religious toleration and the idea of what we might call anti-clericalism, or being against like religious authorities. Now, Voltaire didn't have any problem with religious beliefs, but he had problems with religious institutions, such as the Catholic Church. The church is basically in France, in absolutist France, when Voltaire was living there in the 18th century, that, the church was one of the biggest censors of opinion. And so that's something that Voltaire, again, just being against the idea of religious authority that had backing from the state. So Voltaire is supporting this idea of separation of church and state, and he's also supporting the idea of religious toleration. A lot of his ideas come from John Locke, which John Locke. Now, I've got a whole lecture series on this on my YouTube channel. But John Locke was big into the idea of constitutional government, the idea of the consent of the governed, that government is only legitimate. Government is legitimate not because of divine right. Okay, that's what the divine right absolutists were saying. Government is legitimate because people consent to it. Now, does that mean that we'll always like the government and the people who govern? No, but giving your consent is one of those things where the government, at least if we're not actively rebelling against the government, we're basically giving it our consent. And when you look at the glorious revolution of 1688, in Britain, you see the advent of this constitutional government. So Voltaire is very important. Locke, of course, is an influencer. Diderot is putting a lot of ideas out there. Now, the other thing is I've got a video lecture on Locke versus Rousseau. Rousseau is always also important, but what we want to note about Rousseau is he's an outlier. Okay, that basically, and one thing that's really interesting about Rousseau is that Voltaire, he thought that Rousseau's book, The Social Contract, was pure garbage. Okay, but he believed, because again, Rousseau has some kind of romantic sort of sensibilities, and he's kind of an outlier. We'll talk about Rousseau a little more tomorrow when we're going to focus on the French Revolution, Napoleon. So that's something we'll want to note about that. But Voltaire said that he didn't like the idea of the book being burned and banned. Voltaire felt like Rousseau's book, The Social Contract, is a terrible enough book that we can pick it apart through argument and basically, discuss why nobody should take it seriously. And so, to Voltaire, when you censor, you are not, you're not being enlightened. Okay, if you feel like you've got to just throw down somebody else's opinion and you can't argue with, you can't just, defeat it by argument. So with this, what is an easy way to specifically differentiate between scientists and philosophers, their ideas? I mean, the thing is, Lauren, just make sure that you're studying. Now, also, the Romulus app. Remember, Romulus Euro is available at the App Store. It's a really old app I developed 10 years ago, and we just decided to we dissolved the business, and I've still got it on the App Store for free. So it's a nice little kind of trivia thing there. Now, let me see, have y'all heard my new rap on Instagram and TikTok? Okay, let me ask about that. Now, y'all might not want me to rap. Y'all might say hey, you know what? We're here to study. We don't want to hear you rap. You're not even a rapper, Richie. Get over that. So we're going to go ahead and just see if y'all have heard this or not. Got a little thing about the Reformation from the point of view of Martin Luther. It's actually, Charles Dickens used to serialize books and stuff like that. Oh, y'all want to hear the WAP parody again? We'll probably do that again before it's all. You'll probably hear the WAP parody 3 or 4 more times before this is all over. But remember, those of you who are here, we're here at 8 p.m. every night until the exam, and we're also here at 9 a.m. the morning of the exam. So with that, Lauren, you're just going to have to study. Now, also prioritize, okay? Like I said, when it comes to the scientific revolution, you've got Copernicus, Galileo, William Harvey, and Descartes, then Newton. So don't try to do too much, okay? Don't try to get too many people, but that's one of those things that, you're just going to have to keep looking at it over and over again, whether you want to do Quizlet, whatever works for you. This is the thing, there's no magic study pill that works for everybody. It's the, success on exams like this is a commitment to spend time preparing, and then that your time is being spent in a way that is beneficial to you. And one thing I would say, Lauren, if you're having trouble with something, look at it every day. There's something about a good night's sleep that is, just look at it, get a good night's sleep, look at it again the next day, reinforce it. That is always important. These things, most people aren't going to learn them just one time. And so as far as that goes, Elaine, this is going to be, the Magna Carta and the Petition of Right. They are both statements of constitutionalism. Okay, so the Magna Carta is thank you, Brian Cow. Brian's milking a cow or something like that. That's interesting. So with that, these are both statements of constitutionalism. The Magna Carta is from the Middle Ages, where basically the king agrees to basically say that I'm not going to tax without consent. The Petition of Right was when Parliament criticized. Now, they didn't criticize Charles I directly, but they criticized Charles I, people. Okay, they didn't criticize him directly. Charles accepted the petition but didn't really act on it. These two things, they can be, if you understand them, they can be great, but I wouldn't consider either of those necessarily essential for the exam. If you can use these and you're familiar with them, they could conceivably be used for the free response, but it's not something that you'll necessarily see that. But we want to understand the bigger idea that the English Civil War and the Glorious Revolution, they are, they're landmark events in the, England's path to a constitutional government that's dominated by Parliament. By the time we get to the Glorious Revolution of 1688, 1689, the British monarch is reigning, but the British monarch is not exactly ruling. Okay, so with that, when we think about, that's an interesting thing there, CJ. The start of the scientific revolution, we usually place this in the 1540s with like Copernicus and then Galileo. This is a time when the printing press, remember, the printing press is another thing that is helping people to communicate information. The printing press, first of all, it was the spread of Renaissance humanism from Italy to Northern Europe. Okay, now from there, you see the Reformation, Martin Luther and John Calvin and all that. And then you've got the scientific revolution. Copernicus was in Poland, and Galileo in Italy is able to read Copernicus and be able to test it out. Okay, so the thing is, a lot of times, like Copernicus's posthumous publication of the revolution of the heavenly spheres, that's often kind of seen as the beginning of the scientific revolution, Copernicus and Galileo. All right, I tell you what, it's so good to see Emily here. I tell you, it's always good to have a teacher asking questions because they know how to ask questions. Students ask the most random questions, but like a teacher usually knows what question to ask. So thank you, Sarah, Matthew, $, and Spicy Pickle 250 for the TikTok follows. And so with that, I wouldn't call the Enlightenment there's a difference between anti-religious and anti-clerical. And when we think about anti-clerical, the idea of clerics, clergy people, like, something that now, of course, it's going to be hard to find Enlightenment philosophers who are conventionally religious, in the sense that they're a Christian who believes like all of the teachings of the church. Newton, kind of pre-Enlightenment, was something of a Christian heretic. Like, he read the Bible all the time, but, he didn't necessarily agree with all of the Church of England's teachings about things. But, Voltaire had no problem with somebody like, if we come, if Voltaire were to come to the United States and see that there are, churches all over the place, but none of them receive support from the government. They're all supported by voluntary contributions. And, that these religious communities all thrive, that you've got all of these competing religious groups. Voltaire would think that's great. And so with that, thank you, Emily, for for asking the right questions, so to speak. Now, with that, y'all, it looks like in the chat they seem to want me to wrap. Okay. What do we not? Oh, yeah, y'all got the Romulus Euro. Remember to give a nice little review or something like that. So the thing is, now, the other thing, I put this Martin Luther portion of this. I put the Martin Luther portion online. Now, I haven't released the Henry VIII part, okay, of this Glorilla, what you know about me. I'm thinking about maybe creating a whole Reformation rap, but for right now, I'm just doing a little bit of time. Now, I could just do the Glorilla part that I've released already, or I could do even the part that I haven't released. Okay, so that's something. Let's see what y'all want to do there. And again, if you're following me on Instagram and TikTok, then you'll be able to see 80% of you have not seen, the new rap. I hope that changes, but maybe they don't want me to do it. So we're going to go ahead and let's get this started. Okay, I'll do both, both parts of this. And again, the Henry VIII part will be coming out, very soon. Okay, that'll be coming out in the next day or so. So let's see what we got here. All right. Is this? There we go. Martin Luther. Christians go to heaven based on faith alone. No indulgences. I got grace at home. Scripture's all I got. Tradition's dead and gone. 95 complaints. I'ma make them known. I got the hammer, nails, door, theses, hammer, nails, door, theses. Y'all sing it with me. Nails, door, theses, hammer, nails, door. Henryvii. Crowned my third wife, Jane. Then she had a boy and died. Church of England, yeah, I'm ruling it supreme. Catherine Howard cheated on me, and I sank that axe deep. Cash in, wives out. I'm a G, selling land that belonged to the monasteries. Renounce the Pope. I ain't twerking to his beat. Parliament's got my back. Act of supremacy. Divorce, beheaded, die. Divorce, behead, survive. Marry me, and you might not make it out alive. 6 wives and I divorcing by the hour. I got wives, cash, church, power. Wives, cash, church, power. Wives, cash, church, power. 6 wives and I divorcing by the hour. I got wives, cash, church, power. All right. So anyway, make sure that y'all give that a little like when it posts. I've got that Henry VIII coming out there, so make sure that that we get on. What was more important, the printing press or McDonald's? Okay, how about that? That's I tell you, that's a great question for the audience. Let's let's actually just put that out there. We've got let's see. I need this out by May 5th. Okay, good to see those of y'all on YouTube. If you're on yeah, it's the original Starry Night. Yeah, if y'all find out it got stolen, y'all can tell the Dutch government or whoever's got it where it is, or is that in the Louvre? I mean, really, it's here, isn't it? If you're on YouTube, make sure that y'all are subscribed and all of that good stuff. And remember, you're welcome to join us on Crowdcast. Now, Crowdcast people, make sure y'all are joining me on YouTube. And so let's go ahead and note which was the more important invention. And we're going to ask here, let's see. So we've got, the printing press and McDonald's. Okay, so the printing press and McDonald's. Let's go ahead and see what y'all think about that. Why not? All right, so ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and see here. How were women impacted by the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment? That's one of those things that would really depend. Now, of course, there's, I would say one of the things that's kind of a takeaway point is, if we think in terms of, for example, Rousseau, okay, that we see in the, that whole it's French. I'm really bad with French. It's a written test, but that quarrel, the femmes, basically the debate about women and what is a woman's place in society and that sort of thing. So there are some, some people who are, arguing for, let's see. Let me think, was it, so basically Condorcet. He's not somebody you're going to find in the course and exam description, but there was a fella named Condorcet. It's a written test, right? It's French, Condorcet, I don't know, but he's arguing that basically women should have all the same rights as men. Now, also, if we think about the French Revolution as partially a consequence of the Enlightenment, okay, the French Revolution, that we do see that during the French Revolution, there are periods during the Reign of Terror where they start talking about what is marriage? What are divorce rights? That kind of thing. So we see some of that, but also Rousseau, we see that Rousseau Rousseau comes down very much on, and again, not so much on the with the Enlightenment, he's kind of an outlier. But Rousseau is basically defending women being in separate spheres. Now, Mary Wollstonecraft, I've got something about Mary Wollstonecraft on my YouTube channel. It was actually, I enjoyed that doing that series years ago. But Mary Wollstonecraft, wrote a Vindication of the Rights of Man. She was an English writer who was, who was a fan of the French Revolution, and so she anonymously wrote a Vindication of the Rights of Man. And then she went on to write a Vindication of the Rights of Woman, and basically thinking in terms of classical liberalism. So we can think, when we think about classical liberalism and this idea that everyone has natural rights, that people, are equal, in the sight of God and that sort of thing, that is going to be something that, is going to down the road make a big, it's going to down the road make a big difference. And so enlightened absolutism. Now, as far as in depth, okay, so we've got a question from Izzy here asking, in depth, can I explain enlightened absolutism in depth? Now, I've already done that on a video, so I will tell y'all that, sometimes when somebody wants an in-depth explanation, I'll tell you that, okay, I've already got that on a video. But with that, let me just go ahead and kind of give you, the short version here. Let me go ahead and get my my screen sharing and all of that kind of stuff. So let's have a look. So enlightened absolutism, we got Frederick the Great there, and basically we have this idea that the absolute monarchs of the mid to late 18th century are going to be thinking about how can we incorporate the Enlightenment, okay? And so absolutists are trying to apply Enlightenment principles. And so I often say it's a trap. It's a trap, okay, from, which I need to go see Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. Any of y'all going to see that yet? But, I remember I went to go see it 20 years ago. It was actually the theaters. None of y'all were alive. And so, your teachers were, I guess. But it's a trap. Toleration, reform, absolutism, and patronage, okay? So for one thing, if you are an enlightened absolutist, so Louis the 14th, he's an absolutist, but not an enlightened absolutist. When Louis the 14th says one king, one law, one faith, Louis the 14th kicks the Huguenots out of France. He is not tolerating religious minorities. Okay, so we see here that when we think about James the First and Charles the First, they were not tolerant of religious minorities. And it's only after the Glorious Revolution, or really to a certain extent after the English Civil War, in the Restoration, but it wasn't really until like the late 1600s, early 1700s, where England really has toleration. And then so Frederick the Great, okay, and we're talking about enlightened absolutism, Catherine II, Frederick II, and Joseph II. Now Catherine and Frederick, they are both the great. Joseph, I guess, the not so great. He was not called Joseph the Great. And so Frederick the Great, I would say, is the most successful enlightened absolutist. So, he called himself the first servant of the state, which you can't really imagine Louis the 14th referring to himself like that. Frederick patronized Voltaire, was a frequent correspondent. Frederick the Great kind of saw himself as a philosopher king, okay, that he's a king, but he's also a man of letters and a philosopher. Now, Voltaire had a falling out with Frederick as well, so we want to note the limitations of enlightened absolutism as well. Now, also, they call Frederick the potato king, okay, like because Frederick was so adamant about the potato becoming a crop in Germany, which today potatoes make up a pretty, big part of German cuisine. And so you think about things like hash browns. When you're having hash browns for breakfast, think that's German. But Frederick is saying, look, okay, so scientifically, like we think about this rationally and scientifically, that the potato is a very calorie-rich food. Like, in fact, after, y'all talk about McDonald's, after I'm done here, I might run over to McDonald's, get some fries or something like that, even though my doctor says I probably shouldn't do that, right? Because fries, like when we eat a bunch of potatoes, we've got access to a bunch of food. So, we're going to put on weight and all that kind of stuff. But if you think about if your people are starving and they don't have McDonald's, okay, then growing potatoes makes a lot of sense because potatoes are very nutritious, very calorie rich. And so Frederick is telling his people, grow potatoes. Okay. It's rational. In fact, I've got this book called The Potato King, and it's somewhere on my shelf over there. I'm not sure exactly, but we got to remember, like the night before Euro, when it's time to read a bedtime story, somebody remind me to get The Potato King. Could somebody make a note of that? That Sunday night, remind me to get the Potato King. It's a cute little book about Frederick the Great. And again, they call him Potato King. That's very enlightened. Okay. And so as far as that, Frederick was always a religion, was also a tolerator of religions. Now, the other thing we want to note here is that there are the limits of of enlightened absolutism. Militarism. So Frederick is chiefly known. In fact, I don't know if it would still show up like this, but when I was designing this lecture, when I looked up Frederick the Great, he's known as much for being a military commander than he was as a king. So when we think about Frederick, okay, Frederick's like the philosopher king, but on another way to look at this, Frederick's just another Prussian militarist. So one of the questions that we could ask is enlightened absolutism. Oh, that would be a great little LEQ topic. Was enlightened absolutism like more continuity with absolutism or more change from absolutism? That's something to think about. Now, Catherine the Great was a very, very big patroness of the philosophers. Okay, like she was really, she loved Diderot, she loved Voltaire. Now, the thing is, though, when Pugachev's rebellion broke out, there was this huge peasant revolt that, Catherine decided she was going to come down hard on this, had this guy paraded through Russia in a cage. That's not very enlightened. The Enlightenment is about human dignity and not torturing people and not punishing people in humiliating ways and that kind of stuff. So that's something to note here. Joseph II was the biggest reformer, and again, somebody who, inaugurated toleration policies in Austria, but, he was in a lot of ways too ambitious, and he became kind of the least successful because he kind of tried to do too much. So going from there, when we're looking at, Rousseau and Voltaire's ideas, okay? Now we've got Asher. A couple of things, Asher, that I'm going to note here. First of all, we're focusing on the scientific revolution and Enlightenment. Now, also, I will tell y'all that I prefer questions that are more specific than telling me to, hey, can you go over like an entire 70-year period or something like that. So think about that when y'all are asking the questions. Like I'll probably not, typically, indulge questions that ask me to go over an entire unit because that's really asking a lot. You can do a whole, a whole thing about it. So as far as that goes, yes, Mackenzie on YouTube, I would consider Napoleon to be an enlightened absolutist because Napoleon practiced religious toleration. He reformed the government when you think about the Napoleonic Code. That, this is something that gave France a law code, right? It gave France a code of laws for the whole country. So there are a lot of Napoleon's reforms that we would say that yes, Napoleon could very well be considered an enlightened absolutism. I mean, an enlightened absolutist. He's not, a person can't be an absolutism, right? So that's something that yeah, I would say definitely. And also Napoleon, at the end of the day, he was another militarist. All right. And that's something that the enlightened absolutists had in common. Now, somebody's asking me, Jessica, you're asking me about any tips on the multiple choice section. I'm going to let y'all know that I'm very likely either Friday or Saturday night. I'll let y'all know. I've got to schedule these. I have to sit down and like actually put these in there. But there are going to be some premium sessions that I'm going to set up that, there will be like a $10 admission ticket, but I'm going to go, it's not just going to be some tips on the multiple choice. We're going to have like a full like workshop that's going to go, somewhere between 60 and 90 minutes. And we're going to like drill and practice and stuff. So y'all stay tuned for that. I am going to make that available probably in the next day or so. But sometime this weekend, I am going to offer a multiple choice strategy session that can either be shown, it can be something that is, you can watch it live or you can watch it later, but it'll go like very in depth on that. So I think, Kieran, I've already gone into Rousseau's and Voltaire's ideas. Now, Sean, again, the big thing, like as far as the unifying thread of the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment is, oh my goodness, okay, people are trying to get me to read stuff. That is, that's really funny. Yeah, sometimes people get me, but most of the time they don't. I said something really inappropriate on a broadcast some time ago, maybe a couple years ago, and it was really funny. Like somebody got me, and I just didn't even see it coming. So with that, let me thank St. Just, D History with Tiffy, Mila and Chloe and Yessie and Molly and Lily for the recent TikTok follows. So the biggest threads are empiricism and rationalism. Okay, like if you can drill those in, and those are words that if you get anything about the scientific revolution, empiricism and rationalism, and know what they are. Now, one of the things that's so important on the on the things here is that you actually explain, you describe or explain it. Okay, that's going to be extremely important to describe or explain, not just to be able to say empiricism, but to be able to say that empiricism is when somebody can prove something based on the senses, based on sensory experience. And an example of this would be Galileo with his telescope. Rationalism, Descartes, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Okay, so Descartes, I think, therefore I am. This is something that when we're considering this, that Descartes said, look, I don't even know if I exist. I can't prove rationally that I exist. But then he's like, wait, I'm thinking right now. And the idea of something thinking that doesn't even exist makes no sense. Whoa, rationalism, you see? That's rationalism. So as far as that goes, that's, when we think about that, the scientific revolution led up to the Enlightenment by getting people to think about things not based on just tradition and superstition, but evidence. Now, one thing that we want to note as well is that this is not necessarily a period where everybody is, where everybody is thinking scientifically. We want to note the witch craze. When you think about like the late 1600s, there were a lot of witches being burned. So at the same time that there are developments in science and we're progressing toward empiricism and rationalism, they're also burning a lot of witches, about 80% of them women. Okay, so the witch craze is a concurrent development with the witch craze is a concurrent development with the scientific revolution. So that's something that's going to be a very important thing there. And so, and we want to note here, Nitty, we are going to note here that the scientific and revolution, the Enlightenment, that the scientific revolution is bringing that empiricism, rationalism, and also the Enlightenment is expanding things, right? Because when it comes down to it, the Enlightenment is much more about like, let's use these scientific discoveries to think about how our society's set up, how our governments are constructed, and all of this stuff. So that's something that we want to note going from there to there, that one's kind of leading to the other. And also remember that John Locke's ideas, Isaac Newton's ideas, they are having a big influence. Okay, so as far as that goes, ladies and gentlemen, let's see what we've got over here. We're just going to see. Just see, oh my goodness. Yeah, you know what? I think that, that wouldn't be the, kids don't do drugs, okay? But if you were going to do drugs, Descartes would probably be the guy. Now, again, just don't do drugs. Like that's just that's we want to make that clear, okay? But I would say like okay, Descartes, CJ. I don't know. Did you send it that email address that I sent it to? Oh my goodness! Shout out to Mr. Burke. But Mr. Burke says don't do drugs. Lauren, you have really like encapsulated what we've been doing. Like if we don't get anything else out of here, tonight, it's just like don't do drugs. Okay, that is something that we want to make sure that everybody is aware of, and that's just not going to be a good. My goodness, that is not going to be something that's going to help you on your exam and help you be successful and stuff like that. Nitty says, "Bruh." Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and if y'all got some last minute shout outs or something like that. Um, can I shout out Cami? I just shouted out Cami. So I will be back again. We are going to, be, going live at 8 p.m. every evening. So, let's see. We got Miss Greenlee. We love Miss Greenlee here. Mr. Gray, Mr. Burke is a classic. Dr. Perther, Mr. Aldridge, Miss Wakefield, Miss Zarnick. Oh wow, that's a great name for an AP Euro teacher. Mr. Yurchak. Mr. Hopkins, Mr. Burke, Burley. All right, Miss Wyatt. We've got shout out or shootout or what? Not a shootout. Miss Landers. That's right. We want to shout out to Miss Landers. She's been great for so many years, is she not? And so Mr. DeStefano. And also Miss Nolt. We've got some great teachers out there, Miss Mitchell and Mr. Klotz and Mrs. Cole. Somebody's shouting out to me. Thank you so much, Layla. That's so nice. Miss Dowell, Mr. Aldridge, Miss Izelli, and shout out to Kanye. Oh my goodness. Yeah, this one's not about, we're not talking about Nazism on this thing, are we? And so with that, ladies and gentlemen, we've got a great, thing set up, and I'm looking forward to reviewing with y'all and Mr. Harrison students and Stefano and all of that. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, y'all watch out for the new rap. Also, y'all are going to be, so y'all are going to be, getting some, notifications from me, not only about our live public broadcast every evening at 8, but there are also going to be some opportunities for some small group things. So there we go. I get that once in a while, smiley face. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, it is always a pleasure. I look forward to coming back tomorrow night to focus on the French Revolution and Napoleon. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, we want to, we want to make sure of that, and it is always a pleasure.